John, welcome back to the Everyday Innovator podcast. Thanks for being a guest again.
It's great to be here, Chad. I love the podcast, and it's an honor to be with you.
You have so many important concepts to talk about. I'm anxious to get into them. Our topic is creating the organization you want, or if the organization already exists, recreating it the way that you want it to be. This is also kind of similar to the topic of your new book, the title of the book, which is Create the Organization You Really Want. I do want to provide some background, some context here so that product managers and innovators listening understand why this is important to them. So first, I'll make a connection to my product mastery roadmap. One of the reasons for creating that roadmap is to recognize the unique position that product managers have inside organizations. And I know for readers of your book, John, you make this point well in the introduction, talking about the silos that exist. And product managers are often, if not the only role, one of the roles that really interacts with all the different silos, all these different functions inside most organizations, like, manufacturing and marketing and sales and engineering development and the like. That really gives us a unique perspective, and I think it uniquely equips us to be those who help to redesign organizations to make them perform better, make them meet the needs of the different stakeholders. So that's one part of the context. Another is I want to make a connection to a couple books that Everyday Innovators listening, you probably at least know the titles if you haven't read them before. They both happen to be by Jim Collins. His first one was Built to Last, and then he followed that up with Good to Great. And in Built to Last, he looked at 18 companies that were deemed as visionary companies and basically said, what are the things that they do, right? And then in Good to Great was a similar sort of research that he did on these companies. I have in my notes here somewhere, 28 companies. I couldn't remember. So he identified 28 companies that, according to stock market performance, went along their journey in life being relatively average, right, compared to their competitors, then to a point where they broke out to really being great companies and dramatically outperforming their competitors. And both books are really valuable reads. Last time I looked, maybe John, Good to Great is the all-time best-selling business book, which is, not bad for Jim Collins.
That's not surprising.
It's a good thing to be. Collins lives north of us just a bit up in Boulder, Colorado, and we have a friend that used to run into him some at the rock climbing gym. But anyhow, these are important books. But as we've discussed in the past, and I know as analysts have looked at these books, they're often kind of misinterpreted because they talk about correlations, right? They talk about, these things that great companies did. Like if you create a big, hairy, audacious goal, the BHAG, sometimes it's called, that's what great companies did. But if you make BHAGs, does that mean you're going to be a great company? Right? They're correlations. It's not necessarily you do these things and you turn into a great company. And we're really left with needing a roadmap for how do you become a great company? What are the steps one goes through? More importantly, maybe what's the framework that leaders could work through to figure out how to take their company from what it is now and create it to be the great company they want it to be. I really see that as the place that your work, really your professional life work, and particularly this book fits as this follow-on to the idea of Good to Great, but it's really the roadmap for how do you make a company great? How do you create the organization you want? First off, I got to get your feedback on that because we haven't talked about this. Just how is that for positioning of your work in the book?
I think that was right on, spot on, Chad. There's really nothing that we found in our research and in my experience that was different from Good to Great or that countered the findings in Good to Great or Built to Last. We went beyond those findings and we have additional insights, but nothing we found said that those things didn't work. And I think a couple of things, when I read Built to Last back in the 90s and when I read Good to Great, both of them had immediate face validity for me. And after working to change organizations for many years, they both just seemed spot on. They had great points, very useful points, very practical. Mm-hmm. And the books together as a pair really form a great jumping off point. I think what differentiates is our work, or what I've been working on, is what's the definition of great. And I think in Good to Great, they use stock price over a period of years, and stock price is a good metric because it aggregates a lot of judgment about the company and a lot of metrics into one. But it still is primarily a market-driven financial measure. And so I was interested in, and have been interested in, is how do you create great financial results, but also do it in a way where you're creating value for all the stakeholders, and consequently the financial results would be sustainable, and maybe even more depending on how you go about that. And so the definition of success, or what I call sustainable excellence, really is the ability to redesign and create value for multiple stakeholders, including the financials, but also the customers, the workforce, the suppliers and partners, doing it in a way that's good for the community, and they're happy to have us in their area, and doing it in a way that's at least neutral and could be a positive for the natural environment. So in other words, in short, success or being great to me is being able to create financial or economic results in a way that doesn't require stealing from other stakeholders in order to do it. Because when you're stealing from other stakeholders in order to do it, it's not sustainable. So you may achieve it for a period of time, but it's not sustainable. And I'm really interested in sustainable greatness, if you will. And
indeed, I was going to say that indeed that's a problem with Good to Great that's been observed is, a number of those companies aren't great anymore, and some of them aren't in existence. So it's kind of gone from good to great to gone. And I do view your book, which for those on video, holding it up here, as the roadmap for, how it seems like to me in most of what we do inside of organizations, that if we are copying the practices of others, we can only get so far because they're not really tailored to our organization. And that takes the hard work of leaders to figure out what makes sense for us to do to really be great. I often look at Lego as an example of this, a company that was on the edge of bankruptcy in 2003. That tried lots of different things until they really figured out what made sense for them, with help through co-creating with their community. And that's what I see as so important about this work. And I do, before we dive into the meat here, I would like for you to share some of the background of how this came to be, because there's lots of research that has gone into the tools that you present in the new book.
Well, the book, Recreate the Organization You Really Want, is a culmination really of 25, 30 years of both practice and research. So it's kind of, at this point in time, what are the key lessons learned, and how do those provide a blueprint for helping a leader become an architect of their own organization? And so it really came together, though, when we did research with CEOs who had led successful transformations to receive the Baldrige Award. And this included big manufacturing companies, big service companies, small businesses, but it also included healthcare, hospitals, and education, K through 12 and higher ed. So there was a group of organizations, and we did a deep dive with the CEOs and took what we had learned over the years, took what other people had done in research, and then did this deep dive with these CEOs. And that really helped bring together a framework for leading transformation. And when you combine that with another framework, a design framework for management design or organization design, you take those two frameworks together and they form a blueprint, if you will, for creating the organization you really want. So it really has been born out of personal practice and learning from other people along the way, research that we did and with CEOs, and it incorporates research and ideas from other people. And I note in the beginning of the book that where all these ideas came from over the last 25, 30 years is hard to track down sometimes. So we cited the main ones that we thought needed to provide, or that people would be able to look up and go deeper into those topics, but there's probably a lot we didn't cite and miss. So it's really a combination of other people's learning and research and what we've learned from them, what we've learned on our own, and what we learned from research with the CEOs.
Mm-hmm. And really valuable research there. And I know you are, you would not position yourself this way per se, so I'll do it for you. With groups that are really into transforming organizations for high performance, and the people that are involved in that sector, you're somewhat of a rock star in that space. And, to the point that people come up, and now that you have the book out, they'll hand you the book, but they would used to hand you maybe one of your award-winning articles and ask for your autograph. And this is just a very geeky sort of thing, but in this space, I just want to make the point that this is really good research that has accumulated to create the frameworks that you have now, which is kind of distinctive, I think, from a lot of the other tools that have come along just through practice. So, and let's talk about why this is an important topic now. Organization design and leading transformation inside organizations. Why is this something that we're thinking about, in this current age?
I think the short answer is maybe we've tried everything else and we're still struggling to make organizations perform at their full potential. But I mean, organization design in our context really is not just the structure and org charts and, what's outsourced and what's insourced. Those are certainly parts of it. But I think it's important, from our perspective, is that organization design is really the alignment of the stakeholders and their needs with the strategy of the organization, with the systems and systematic approaches and how they approach work and process, with the scorecard of the organization. And then those four cornerstones are all held together by an aligned culture that supports and bring those things to life. And so the rituals and the symbols and the heroes that that really make our culture explicit are part of the design. And that all is context dependent on the particular organization. And it has to be led and it has to be designed, or it should be designed, in other words. So it's an important topic today because we face so many challenges, and it almost seems a cliche. I think my entire professional life, the world's been changing and changing faster, and we've always said that. And yet, it seems to be changing even faster today than it ever has. So this pace of change seems to be increasing. And I think when you couple that with the complexity of the world, so as we operate in global environments, and as we operate and outsource a lot of things, and we come together and partner, and we have workforces that come and go, and we have products and services that come and go and have short life cycles sometimes, we're just constantly changing in an organization. And I think the organization designs that we need today are flexible and agile. And some people, I think, will react to systems as saying, well, systems are equal bureaucracy. And they certainly can if that's the way you design them. But systems can also equal agility and be flexible and be human in a way that helps you, address issues as they come along. So I think it has probably always been important, but business is getting tougher and tougher all the time, it seems. And we tend to have a lot less time. And at a time when we have a lot less time, really the answer may not be getting better at working in our organizations as leaders, but it may be carving out some time and getting better at working on our organizations. And that's really what organization design is about, is taking the time out to be the architect of your organization and design it thoughtfully and consciously so that it performs better.
The things that really stand out for me in that is the complexity and the pace of change that we're dealing with inside organizations. Increasing complexity and that velocity of change increasing makes it more of a struggle, and the need to have to reevaluate your organization, and probably why some of those organizations in good to great are now gone, right? The aspect of design when it comes to this organizational performance, as product managers, we have to think of design, maybe, that the product customer interface, the user experience type interface. How are you using design?
Well, design, some people would say organizations actually don't really exist because they're not a physical thing, right? Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of physical things or artifacts that communicate what an organization is. So if we just go back to an organization is information, then all those artifacts that represent that organization or represent those ideas and concepts, everything from understanding the needs and requirements of our stakeholders, including customers, to the strategies that we lay out and visually display with business models and different ways, and goals that we write down and track, along with systems and the way we describe our systems and the metrics that we use. All of those things are artifacts. And so the design of those, really the most important issue is the alignment of those things. And so that they're consistent and coherent, and along with the artifacts of the culture, which are, a lot of people think, organizations are pretty squishy to get your arms around. They really think culture is squishy because we really can't see values. And so when we talk about designing culture, we're talking about designing things in a way that is consistent with the values that we want people to exhibit or in the organization. And so the artifacts that we have the ability to design that affect culture greatly are the rituals. How do we do things in the company? How do we have meetings? What are those rituals? And we often don't call them rituals because that's what, anthropologists call them as opposed to business people. But that's what they are. And we have symbols, everything from, reserved parking slots to the type of office you get to, in years past, separate washrooms and eating facilities for different categories of them. Those are really important symbols. Those tell you things about the values of the company. And same with the heroes. We hold certain people up and we tell stories about founders sometimes, or just the great engineers that are the famous ones in the company. At least they're famous in the company, right? And we tell stories about them and they're held up and revered. Well, what the values that their behaviors represent are part of the culture. When they become heroes, they should be the people that are displaying the values or the behaviors that we value. So when we talk about design, it's not like a thing, but yet we use some of the design thinking and design tools to design all of those things, and from the systems and how we operate and to the heroes that we have, and what are the criteria we use to select heroes and to hold them up. And so all those things are designed, whether consciously or unconsciously. And what we're proposing is that you do that consciously and you think it through and then test it and adjust it.
Yeah, designing the elements like, strategy, metrics, the things you mentioned, that make the organization the organization. And I appreciate that you emphasized that the alignment between those, designing the alignment in, is so important too. Just as a quick aside, one of my experiences, I was not a VP, but I was invited to join the executive team because I was in the role that sat between all the functions. So indeed, that role that was often being squeezed between the silos. And it just absolutely amazed me. And maybe I saw this more because I was actually between the roles and interacted more with the VPs that were involved, that at one meeting in particular, an organization that was largely managed by objectives. So the CEO would, say what the objectives were for the organization. And then same day after the meeting, go talk to the VP of sales on how he was responding to that, and the VP of engineering, how he was responding to that. And pointing out that if you indeed do what you do, that's going to make this other guy's job really difficult and challenging. But that wasn't how they perceived it. Like that's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to optimize my role, my function, my department, right? If I'm in sales, I optimize sales, even if that might jeopardize something that is going on in engineering, right? That alignment is so very important, and it's left out of organizations too often.
Well, and the issue that you're talking about is also part of the alignment of incentives and part of the alignment of culture and part of the alignment of developing employees. So all too often we grow executives in a particular functional area or silo, and some organizations make sure they get assignments that are, broadening and they get to view other parts, but sometimes they don't. We also, if you can succeed and get promoted and get bonused based upon optimizing your area at the expense of other areas, the design and the alignment of the incentives is not there. And so, it's interesting that most management ideas and techniques and fads we've had actually do work if you do them right and you align everything to support them. Mm-hmm. But all too often we plop down a new management technique or a new management idea in the middle of an organization, and we don't work through the system integration, for lack of a better word, but the alignment of the rest of the components in the organization. And so these things fail, and they fail to produce the results. And then we blame the idea or the technique when it was really us not doing our job of good integration and alignment of that new technique into our business systems and our culture.
Let's talk about challenges for a moment. If this was easy, every organization would be created the way that the people working in the organization wanted, right? So What are the challenges that product managers who are becoming leaders, what should they expect to run into? What do they have to overcome to really become the designers of their organizations?
Yeah, in every presentation, you probably ought to have 3 good points, right? And just so happens there's 3 big challenges that almost always come up. And product managers, they actually are very well suited to take on this role of an organization architect, because they are used to working with products which are solutions to problems and designing solutions for customers, right? So they're used to that thinking, and they're used to being opportunity driven and designing things a better way. They also, as you've alluded to and been talking about your experience in the past, oftentimes product managers are very experienced at working across these functional silos, and they understand the organization as a system better than most other people who are in these functional silos. And so you combine those and they're very well positioned. But even that, they still face, I think, probably three big challenges. The first one that we face is just taking a systems perspective and understanding dynamic systems. And this just always comes up, and you may be wondering, and we've been talking about this for over 50 years, and yet we still don't teach it in business schools. We train people in business schools in the different disciplines, and the professors, and this isn't being critical necessarily, but they're really good at their individual disciplines, and they often know the other people, researchers and academics in their discipline better around the world than they know their colleagues down the hall in another department. Mm-hmm. And so we don't organize our business schools in systems. We don't organize our curriculum. We don't organize our research, and we don't organize our teaching and what we do. So we produce a siloed education in business schools, and then we expect people to figure out how to put it together later. And so, we've been talking about this for a while, and we've talked about the need for it for a while, and everybody shakes their head and says, but yet we're still putting it. So I think just taking your business education, whatever that you had, or your experience, and learning about dynamic systems and how that organization is a dynamic system is the first challenge. And I think if you can't get to that, we really don't have a basis for design, because you really do need that understanding as a jumping off point for good design. The second challenge that most executives face is really their own ego. And collaboration is just so important to design, in all kinds of design. There's really no one single person, even a product manager who's experienced, that has all the answers to a good organization design or a good piece of the organization design. And so collaboration is really important to good organization design. And so the good organization designers and leaders have had an ego that's somewhere on an intermediate position between arrogant and so humble that they're meek and mild. Most of them have occupied some intermediate position where they advocated their ideas, and they were leaders, and they had an agenda, but they didn't think they had all the answers, and they involved people into helping them. How do they get these solutions? And so design was a collaborative process.
Which I'll mention is also well suited to product managers, who we very quickly learn we don't have all the answers, and when we misunderstand what the customer actually needs. and we're already good at collaborating with others to generate ideas and help provide value for customers.
Yeah, it's interesting that that's probably an important dimension for success in almost anything that involves humans, and adequate evaluation of risk. But, those first two really are solvable. We can learn about systems, and we can work on ourselves and become more collaborative and do that kind of work. That's a little bit harder. So the technical challenge of systems is probably easiest. The ego challenge is probably second. The third one, I find it really hard to fix. People have to really fix this for themselves, I think. I haven't figured out a systematic way to do it other than leading them through some successful projects and they just get excited about it. But the last one, I think, is curiosity. If they don't have curiosity, then they probably didn't make it this far in this podcast. And so people listening to this podcast probably are curious. And so they're wondering why that might be a challenge. But there's just a heck of a lot of people running organizations and occupying organizations that aren't that curious about better ways to run the organization. And they just want to do it whatever way works. Let's get it done and get out of here, and I get that. But if you're not curious and you're not interested in, new and innovative ways that you might be able to, design the organization in a unique way, you're going to be very limited in the ability of creativity and innovation you can bring to management and the organization design. And I would contend that we need a lot of creativity and innovation in management and organization design. And I think the need for that is only going to get greater. So, in certain ways, you almost, it's useful to think of the organization as, your little petri dish where you're conducting experiments and seeing what works, what doesn't work, because so much of what works in business is context dependent and not generalizable. And in fact, from a strategy perspective, we're not really hoping for an organization design and culture that's generalizable. Otherwise, people will be able to copy it easy. So we're really looking for unique designs that fit our people, our purpose, our strategy, and the type of work we do. And so you need a custom design.
Those challenges, the reason why in my product mastery roadmap that the product master ends at really becoming the designer of the organization for greater performance is as you walk through those challenges, the product manager is ideally suited again for each of those, taking that system perspective because we deal with all the silos, being collaborative by nature, right? And having generally, I've met a few that aren't, but generally having our ego in check because we recognize the value of collaboration. And of course, curiosity, we're naturally curious and creative and want to exercise. We like diving in to find out why there is a problem and how can we fix it in a way that adds value. So important challenges and also kind of a nice role description for why product managers need to be doing this work. That addresses some of the factors that might be, the critical success areas for someone to be this organizational architect to redesign an organization. What are some of the other keys for success?
Well, I think that one of the biggest issues for success really is tenacity. I think one of the things that we've found is that, designing organizations is, first of all, it's never done, right? So even organizations that come up with a great design and create high performance, if they aren't building continuous renewal and reinvention and rethinking into their organization design, entropy will eventually take over and they'll decline in performance. So none of these solutions, and even the solutions in the book, are a recipe for success for the next century, unless you do them all and keep doing them all. And so there's a whole chapter on learning and improvement and the ways to learn. And at the end of the day, it really is about learning, and it's about learning forever and learning things about your organization that nobody else actually knows. Right. In other words, creating new strategies, creating new ways of doing things, testing them, finding out what works, what doesn't work. Well, you're not going to find those answers in a book. You're going to find those answers by conducting your own experiments. But you first have to come up with a cool new design and to test. And so that's a continuous process, and it just never ends. So back in the quality movement, we used to say it's a journey without an end. And it's not a very good marketing pitch, because most people are like, okay, I don't want any of that. I want something that I can accomplish and be done with. Mm-hmm. Well, when we figure that out, we will package it, because we can make a lot of money on that.
Right.
We can figure out the solution to organization performance that'll be fixed for 100 years. We'd really be good, but we haven't. And I don't know anybody that has.
Yeah. It goes back to those points you talked about in the beginning of the increasing complexity and that increasing pace of change. If we're not constantly learning, our organization is getting stale.
Right. And declining probably, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. So it's back to, if you're not, you may not have to grow in quantity, but you have to continually develop. So, I stopped growing in size. This is a Russell Lakoff concept I got from a talk he did probably 30 years ago. He said, I quit growing in size, somewhere in my late teens. But since then I've been developing and getting better. And so sometimes, so whether we're growing in size or developing, we've always got to be developing. And the same is true with our organizations. And that's really the only way we know to stay on the leading edge and stay competitive and be relevant in a fast changing marketplace. Mm-hmm. So which product managers are uniquely suited again to take, they know this about products, right?
Right.
Well, it's the same is true for the organization that it creates those products. Mm-hmm. And so much of our products are also services and experiences customers have with our organization. So now we have the intersection of service delivery with organization design and culture and all those things. And this is where, we've got employees that are possibly the most important person to customer satisfaction. And all too often we're paying those people the least and treating them the worst in the organization. And yet we expect them to smile and treat the customer with respect and like the customer is king. And yet that's not how we treat the people. So it gets back, there is an intersection. In fact, separating product development, design, delivery, and customer service, separating that from organization design is almost an artificial separation, but we've been doing it for a long time.
Right. It's that alignment and systems perspective that's so important. So given that this actually involves some hard work, right, that this constant learning it doesn't just automatically happen, we haven't really addressed benefits yet. What are the benefits for leaders diving into this and trying to design the better organization?
Well, I think the first tangible benefit is you have fewer fires to put out. So often we spend much of our executive time putting out fires, working issues between those silos that got mucked up because we don't have a well-oiled process or culture to facilitate that work between the different ones. This happens both in one-off projects, and it happens in repeatable processes for service delivery, is that we do these handoffs. And so the first thing is we have fewer fires to put out. And once we start having fewer fires to put out, it frees up a little bit of our time. One of the things we have to let go of is our feeling of contribution and importance because we're good at putting fires out. And if you've made a lot of people make careers out of putting fires out, and that's how they get promoted because they've saved the day so many times, right? We often have heroes in our organizations that are firefighters,
right? And
they're heroes because they are firefighters. And we, you have to make some sort of switch to where we stop rewarding firefighters and we start rewarding fire prevention. And so I think the first benefit that's real and tangible is you start putting out fewer fires, and that frees up some time for whatever you want, whether it's product development or strategy or doing more improvement. either way, you start freeing up some time. And that's pretty important because you do have to carve out some time. And in the beginning, you got to carve out time and prioritize this. The second thing is you start creating, getting rid of boom bust scenarios, right? So all too often, part of our organization will come up with a really cool idea or product, and marketing will be doing a great job, and they'll get a lot of people excited about it. We get a lot of pre-orders, and we maybe even get a lot of initial sales. And then all of a sudden we find out that we can't make it at the quality we thought we could. And our service with people, the problems, because we have quality issues, we have a lot of service calls and we have a lousy service, process, and we don't deliver. And so all of a sudden we did really good at part of the value chain and really poorly at the other, and our results and our sales start coming back down. And so we end up with these boom bust scenarios. And it's obvious in the sales one, but there also happens in almost all results. We'll do something to make the result change for a short period of time, but then it comes back to whatever it was before. And so the other benefit is these changes result in more sustainable changes. So, because when we change the design of things, or when we change the way we do things, and we change that influences what the people see and hear in the organization, and it influences then what they think and how they feel about those things, which influences their behavior. And so if you're going back and changing the root cause of the behavior, which is the design and the artifacts and the leadership that combines with that. And so we've been talking a lot about design, but hand in hand with design is leadership every day, all day, right? And so it's not like you can design it, leave it alone, and it'll do the job for you. I wish it was that way. It's not like residual income or things like that, where you can create something and go to sleep. You actually create it, but then you have to lead it all the time. And so the combination of good leadership and good design creates different behaviors in people. And so the changes have a greater ability to stick. And the results, consequently, we get results that are more sustainable, and we don't get these boom bust type scenarios. So that's probably benefit number two. And really the last benefit is related to sustainability as well, in that if you're taking from one group to serve another, you can only do that so long. Sometimes we can do it for years, and so we don't really recognize it as an issue, but eventually that system will correct in part. And so it gives us also high performance that's a long-term sustainability. So it's an economic engine that hopefully we, will be happy to be part of, and maybe even help fund our retirement and still be there when we're retiring.
And John, just as a tangible example of that too, because you're talking about in the beginning, you addressed, serving the needs of all stakeholders, right? And that's, I always just say anyone with a vested interest, in the work of the organization is a stakeholder. So an example would be, if you are driving employees to perform at such a fast pace to increase, output so that we can provide more value to our shareholders or our investors, you're taking advantage of the employees for a while, and you do that long enough, and the employees will find other better things to do with their time, right? This really has to do, like the title of your book, right? Create the organization you want. This is I see a key benefit is this is making the organization that you want to work in, right? And everyone else wants to work in too.
Right. Well, that's the what's in it really for me, right? Is it's your opportunity to create the organization you want to work inside of and be a part of. And all too often we get, most of us find ourselves in organizations that somebody else designed. So it's not, the entrepreneur gets to design their own organization, and often it's not done consciously. And so this book is useful for recreating or redesigning. It's also useful if you're designing it for the first time. You've got a viable product. You've now got, sales, and you're having to scale up and actually create a real organization. Then the same blueprint in this book will help you do that. So, but it's creating the one that you want, and the one that you would want to work in. And that's really, and it's not just you, it's you having empathy for all those stakeholders and what it's like to be them inside your organization. So and this is where we run into a little bit of an issue and why the stakeholders are the center of everything and what they need and want, and having empathy for them is the center of everything. Not only is it important for product design because we're trying to provide solutions that a customer wants and will pay for, right? So we know that empathy is important there. But from a business designer perspective, if you're the owner or a senior leader, oftentimes the design for your personal 401k or your retirement or flipping it or whatever your objective is, you may not care about all those other stakeholders. And so this really is about a situation where you care about creating a sustainable company. Even if you're going to sell it, you should be able to get more money for a sustainable company than one that's doing boom bust curves, right? And we're not sure and uncertain about the future. So it should be more valuable to everybody, including the investors. And there's just so much. I think one thing we're starting to realize is, that just from an environmental perspective, the risk associated with doing that poorly are pretty large, and the financial implications are pretty large. And you can lose the entire firm over, environmental issues sometimes. So, but there's a whole more positive side about it, that a whole lot of our environmental challenges have to do with waste, and waste costs money. And so that's the good news. But all too often we look at some of these as making trade-offs. And this isn't about a zero-sum game of making trade-offs. It's about redesigning things so that they do create value for the multiple stakeholders. And that's why a systems view is so important. Right. To good design, because you have to understand that a better supplier partner performance and better workforce performance, when you combine those with better systems and processes, they produce better products and services and create happier customers who buy more from us and bring their friends with us, referral business. So you get repeat and referral businesses, which grow the top line and make the investors happy. And so this is all a system, and good design requires you view it as a system. Otherwise, you'll make design decisions based on trade-offs that are unnecessary. Now, we still, as organizations designers, face trade-offs and sometimes have to make them. And that's because our imagination is not yet good enough, or our creativity has not come up with a solution that allows us to resolve value for both. And so I'm not saying trade-offs don't happen and aren't required. We have constraints, and we have to make trade-offs, and we have to do it all the time. So, but the notion is we make those when we can't figure out a better way. And we first try to figure out a better way, and we explore options and new innovative ways of doing things.
So let's say I'm bought in, and maybe some listeners are bought into this idea of creating the organization that you want. Sounds really appealing. Those benefits that we talked through sound appealing. We understand there is some hard work in doing this, or everyone might be having the organization they already really want. How do you become that organizational designer? How do you start taking this on?
Well, it's funny you should ask. This is going to sound self-serving, and I guess it is, but I would buy the book and read it, because I think wrote the book as the on-ramp to becoming an organization architect. And the things that are in there, it's a few hundred pages. And if you buy the ebook version, it's a screaming hot deal. It's less than $10, And so you really get as good an orientation to the key factors we think are the essentials for being an organization architect are in there. And in fact, there's a few notes just to make the points in every chapter about leader as organization architect. But that's the essence. That's the blueprint. If after that you say, yep, I'd really like to do this, I'd like to learn more, then we're excited because we're launching. And by the time this podcast is up, hopefully it will be launched or shortly thereafter, an e-course that will take you one step further and apply these ideas to your organization. And so we say it's an e-course, but it's really a individual workshop where you work through and apply these to your company and your leadership. So each module talks about organization, application, and it talks about applying it to you as the leader of this. And it's chock full of work sheets and assessment mechanisms that help you think through and structure that and apply it. It still requires you do a custom fit for your organization. So we provide frameworks, flexible frameworks, structures, question, things like that, and worksheets. And it may look to you like fill in the blank, but it's really not fill in the blank. It does require, you become creative. So we try to give you the tools that help frame it and put some parameters up to help get you going. And then you eventually find your way to where you don't need those tools anymore, and you're going beyond those tools and creating your own systems and organization beyond that. So that's how we'd recommend get started. That's why we created those tools, the book and the e-course, is to get people going and give them the tools they need to actually apply this, because we're all about application.
And so the book, probably easiest to find on Amazon, Create the Organization You Really Want.
It's on all the Amazons around the world that have Amazon. And so Recreate the Organization You Really Want. John Latham is the author, and you should be able to find it. And if you can't, you can always contact us.
And just so you know, I don't know if this is still the case. The last time, because I tell people the title is Create the Organization You Really Want. That's because that's how I could find it. I couldn't find it on Amazon or under Recreate the Organization You Really Want. I don't know if you've ran into this or not. So just when I did a search, at least on US.
The things you learn about titles and brackets, because
exactly.
Recreate, the has brackets around it. And that's because if you're creating for the first time, it's create. And if you're already in an organization that it needs to change, it's recreating, right? So, and it's applicable to both. And apparently that's a search problem. Maybe we need to put recreate with no brackets in the keywords on Amazon.
Oh, there you go. I'll make sure there are links in the show notes to make it easy to find this on Amazon, Create the Organization You Really Want. And also your e-course. How can people find that?
That's on organizationdesignstudio.com.
Okay.
So it's a mouthful, but organizationdesignstudio.com is the center of the universe for us, and that's our platform. And there's also a free membership there, so they can sign up for some free goodies that won't cost you anything.
Great. And I know you've listened to the podcast some. You know I love innovation quotes, and I asked you to bring one too. What's the quote you have for us?
So I had to bring a different one this time, and I thought the one that fit what we were talking about the best was one that I think it's attributable to Peter Skillman at IDEO, but I could be wrong. But we'll call it Peter's until we're corrected. And that is, enlightened trial and error succeeds over the planning of the lone genius. And I like that for two reasons. I think it's applicable to what we've been talking about for two reasons is first of all, the whole notion of the lone genius being the innovator. It is true that there are lone geniuses that are innovative, but the innovation we're talking about in organization design is not usually an individual. It's a collaborative approach and requires a lot of diverse input, for a couple of reasons. And that's just organization design and the whole notion of architecture brings together the art and science from so many disciplines, that you really got to have those people in a collaborative effort. So it's not about being a lone genius. Nobody knows enough to do great organization design, or at least I haven't met anybody. Maybe there is somebody. So it's collaborative effort. And so that's right. The other issue is you actually can't do good organization design in the boardroom. You can do a good hypothesis and initial design in the boardroom or in a room somewhere. But until you implement it in the organization and prototype it and implement it and test it out, you don't really know how it's going to work, because the thought experiments that we do in a room are useful, but they're often wrong. And some of the biggest mistakes, and maybe this has happened to you, it's happened to me, where in one part of the organization, they invented a new way of doing something, and it worked so well there, everybody had to do it. And so we all were forced to do it that way. Well, they forgot a little context issue, that process didn't work the same way in the different divisions or the different functions. And for us all to do it that way was going to require some modifications to make it work. Unfortunately, management's answer to that usually is the people need to change, not the process. And so you suck it up and make this work because it does work. We know it works. It works over here. So that's the whole enlightened trial and error and being flexible and testing it. And every time you change the context, you test it and allow for feedback and variation and improvement when necessary to make it work. And so good organization design is not about coming up with a brilliant design in a room, although that's part of the process. The real part of the real work of design comes in testing it, trial and error, redesigning, retesting. So to me, this, and that's a collaborative approach. So to me, this quote just kind of sums it up. So what Peter Skillman said in a few words, I just took a paragraph or two.
It's a great quote. And once again, so applicable to what we do as product managers, because we certainly know about trial and error and running quick experiments and trying to see what works, learn from what doesn't, and make things better. So thanks for sharing the quote. It's not one that I'm used to, which is always a delight for me when I get what I haven't heard before, because it's kind of like, the candy I haven't tried yet in the candy store. Tell us one more time where we can find information for creating the organization that we want.
The place to go is organizationdesignstudio.com.
Great. John, I appreciate your time today.
Oh, it was great fun. Enjoyed it, and great podcast. Keep it going.
Thanks so much.